Good morning, everyone, and this is the Public and Protective Services Committee for January 21st, 2025, our final committee for the day. And on this committee, we have Councillor Blackmore, Councillor Berg, and of course, Mayor Clayton, with myself, Councillor Bosch. So we'll call to order, and I need adoption of the agenda, please. Councillor Berg?
Yeah, I'd like to... There, I just pushed the wrong buttons like Councillor Bressie instructed me to. Committee adopt the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Berg. Call to question. And that is carried. We'll move on to reports, and we will go to Chief Lemieux for reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with regards to the police transition, I'm pleased to report the 12 GPPS recruits are scheduled to complete their basic training at the end of February, with their field training starting in March. And Council will get an invite to their formal graduation ceremony. In Enforcement Services, one new officer has begun work with Enforcement Services this reporting period. City Enforcement has had an increase in the number of officers hired in the past 4 months. We continue to manage the training needs of our new officers by pairing them with experienced officers, and we anticipate and strive to have more cars on the road once training requirements have been met. With regards to downtown patrol, foot patrols in the downtown core have been ongoing from Enforcement Services, and we continue to engage with the vulnerable population. From mobile outreach, needle mitigation efforts have led to the collection of over 1,300 needles in Q4 of 2024. A report from the RCMP on Thursday, November 28th, 2024, Grande Prairie RCMP Drugs Section, with the assistance of the Crime Reduction Unit, executed a simultaneous search warrant at properties in Mount View area at City of Grande Prairie and a residence in Claremont. As a result, the following items were seized by police: 1.4 kilogram of cocaine, 991 grams of meth, 3 kilograms of pills which turned out to be highly potent opioids, 203 cartons of illicit cigarettes, a revolver with ammunition, and $25,000 in Canadian currency. A resident of Grande Prairie has been charged with 10 offenses and has been remanded in custody until this person appears in front of the court. From Housing and Community Development, with regards to the Passionate Heart Awards, nominations are now open until November 28th. The awards will be presented on Friday, February the 14th at 11:30 a.m. And the event's at the Bonnets Energy Center. And more details can be found on the City of GP website. Community Knowledge Campus, some really good news there on January 13th. Of this year, the Eastlink Centre achieved a significant milestone, surpassing 10,000 membership for the first time, 10,000 members for the first time in its history. This accomplishment reflects the community's growing commitment to health and wellness as an integral part of their lifestyle. More than a sports and recreation facility, the Eastlink Centre is where community is built between guests, staff members, user groups, tenants, and visitors from near and far. So certainly City Administration is really pleased with this outcome and thanks Council for their continued support in that area. In terms of tournaments and events at the Eastlink Centre on campus on January 18th and 19th, the Piranhas Winterfest Swim Meet was held and hosted 200 athletes plus coaches, volunteers, and spectators. And also GP Sport Connection tried day welcome opportunities for squash, table tennis, and Arctic sports. In the aquatics world, a permanent head lifeguard position has been filled, ensuring consistent leadership for aquatics service delivery. And a partnership with the Grande Prairie Catholic School District's Celtic Academy is nearing completion. So between October 2024 and January 2025, 410 grade 4 to 9 students will have participated in swim lessons as part of this program. And from the Fitness Center foot traffic, the first 2 weeks of January 2025 saw 13,000 patrons using the fitness center, concourse, and track. This is a 15% increase when comparing to the same period in 2024. So really good success there also. From Sport Development, Wellness, and Culture, There was an active communities initiative grant. The Grande Prairie Pickleball Club was the sole recipient in the region to receive this provincial grant, and it received just over $67,000 to assist with repairs and damage to the outdoor courts. And the city received another grant for the Challengers Baseball Program. The programming team will be partnering with a local community group to host an inclusive program providing an opportunity for children with cognitive and physical disabilities to participate in baseball. And at the Ernie Radburn Pavilion, I'm happy to announce that we have a new concession operator. So the concession operator for the Ernie Radburn Pavilion had a soft launch the weekend of the Grand North Winter Festival, and Musco Eats will have a grand opening in the near future, and council will be invited to attend. And from Events and Entertainment, the Grand North Winter Festival was hosted January 10th to the 12th with over 6,000 guests enjoying the festivities. And we thank all of our event sponsors, so TC Energy Ice Carving, Windsor Ford Little Chippers, Aquaterra Ice Slide, The Office Snow Maze, Canadian Tire Ice Oval, Smash & Sons Equipment and Operator Donation, and Travel Alberta. Toryanka celebrated their 50th annual Malenka with a sold-out show at the Bose on January the 15th. And the Grande Prairie Storm celebrated minor hockey night on Saturday, January the 15th, with over 39 hockey teams and 650 players in attendance. And lastly, the 90s dance mix tour will be in the Bose Saturday, January 25th, and tickets are available online. That is my report, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief Lemieux. Always an extensive report. Lots going on. So is there any questions from committee? No, I just have a couple quick questions for you, Chief Lemieux. The field training timeline for our new recruits, what does that look like?
So basically, that's a process where a new recruit that's gone through all the basic training is paired with an experienced police officer. That training period can be up to 6 months, so I'm going to say 3 to 6 months.
Okay, thank you. And then once again, the nominations for the Passion Heart Awards, is that closed or is that still open? I'm
going to look to Tammy. I had the wrong date on my report. I apologize. I believe it's still open.
January 20th.
January 20th.
Our report said November.
28th, sorry.
So that's why we just wanted to fix that up. And thank you for the report. Mayor Clayton.
Chair Bosch. Chief Lemieux, sorry, I didn't really give you a heads up for this, so if you want to get me the information through email, that's fine. I had received an anonymous mail, a letter through the mail, in regards to snow removal on sidewalks. And so can you remind council, and just for those who might be watching, I can't respond to this person because it was anonymous, but what's the expectation for residents in regards to moving snow and ice on the sidewalk in front of their private properties?
Yeah, so the bylaw does state that it's the responsibility of the homeowner to clear the snow and ice off the sidewalk that's adjacent to their property. I'll have to double check. I believe there's a timeline. I believe it's 24 hours after the snowfall, so I will confirm that. But basically, it is the responsibility of the homeowner.
And if a neighbor didn't feel that their neighbor, if a homeowner didn't feel their neighbor was doing the appropriate removal, would the best process for them to be to call 311?
That is correct, yes.
Great. Thanks so much. That's all I needed.
Thank you, Chief Lemieux. Okay, we're going to move on to 4.2, Community Group and Family Support Services Funding. And Chief Lemieux, can you introduce that?
I will introduce that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So on June 17, 2024, there was a motion made at Council that basically said Council direct administration to support Council through a strategic plan to examine community group funding. And so what we have in front of you today is a report that proposes some direction for future decisions with regards to community group funding, and it speaks to FCSS funding along with community group funding. And so Katie and Tammy are here. They've worked together on preparing this report. We do not have a draft policy change for you at this time. We're just looking for direction. Are we on the right track? And so we want to have that conversation, get some direction from committee, and then we'll come back with the amendments to the policies as required. So I'll turn it over to Katie and Tammy for their presentation.
Thank you, Chief Liua. Welcome, ladies. I know this is an extensive set of programming for both sides, FCSS and community funding. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bosch. Over the last 6 months, administration has been conducting research into various forms of funding. Oh, I'm just going to hit play here on my... There we go. And we've reviewed other municipalities within Alberta primarily, and one also across the country, and that's specifically to community group funding. And we're presenting ideas today for committee consideration. So we will first start with the current state of community group funding. So we're funding support for organizations who provide programs and services that enhance and enrich the city and its residents. We currently have 2-year funding agreements which expire this year, so they'll have funding through to the end of December 31st. And then we have enhancement funding for programs or projects that contribute to quality of life and enhance the livability of the community, up to $15,000. And those are 1-year funding agreements, and those also go till the end of December 31st of this year. Emergency funding to address immediate short-term financial relief to meet payroll demands, pay monthly bills, or address emergency facility needs are also available, and the funding source is typically identified as the requests come in. Our current operating budget for community group funding is $4.3 million in cash, which is approximately 1.71% of the total city budget in 2025. We also have over $5.6 million in gift in kind as of the end of 2024, and roughly $627,000 in maintenance and capital improvements provided to community groups through corporate facilities maintenance, and that was as the end of 2023.
Now for FCSS funding current state. So FCSS operates with a budget of about $2.6 million that's funded through 3 primary streams. Our provincial contribution is $1.35 million per year. Our service revenue, which is all home support fees, is about $115,000, and our municipal contribution is $1.1 million. Just to give you a bit of a breakdown there, so for the $1.6 million of internal staff costs is really the operations of community social development. So it funds about 20 different positions, with the majority of the funding going towards our home support program, which has 14 staff and supports 216 residents every month in their home. Again, with the internal operations of the staff, we are overseeing the operations of the building manager of Cedar Point and keeping the front reception open following the city's hours. And with the community agency support, that is the approximately $1 million a year that we put out through an RFP process that funds currently 15 community group agencies with 19 different programs. However, there is more of a breakdown on the details of all of the programs that are funded in your admin report in Table 3.
So today, administration is looking for direction from committee on policy changes to be presented for 2026 funding applications. We have conducted significant research and identified best practices, and this framework will prioritize diverse funding streams, community impact, and alignment with council's strategic goals. For smaller grants, simplifying grant processes will enable more organizations to access funding, and for larger multi-year grants, a focus on community impact ensures resources are allocated effectively. So there's a bit of an outline here of some of the recommendations. So the smaller grants, we're looking at up to $10,000, which is slightly down from the $15,000 it currently is. We would reduce the application requirements and the reporting requirements. And then medium-sized grants would be more for pilot projects and seed funding, and that would be up to a maximum of 2 years. So that would be specifically to respond to unmet, complex, or emerging community needs. And it would have a funding agreement as well as reporting requirements. And then large grants for community partners and organizations operating city-owned facilities would be to a maximum of 2 years with enhanced reporting requirements and funding agreements. It's also recommended that capital grants are only funded to a maximum of 50% of the total project costs, with 50% required as matching. And this is consistent with many other grants, provincial grants in particular. We would remove the FCSS funding from the current community group funding policy and create a new standalone policy for FCSS. And, oh, sorry, this is Tammy. I forgot.
Yes, with the removal of the funding from policy, the FCSS from policy 315 and the creation of a standalone policy, it would govern a broader community group funding. However, FCSS is guided by specific provincial mandates from the Family and Community Support Services Act and regulation that prioritizes prevention and social services. So with this proposed change and having this standalone policy, it would create and allow for us to meet our provincial mandates and focus on preventative social services and ensure that City Council has input into the funding policy and the guidelines that we normally could follow. And as Katie had mentioned, we've looked at we did a scan of all of the other municipalities, and we are two of the municipalities that don't have a standalone FCSS policy. And then that's a very small municipality, which is Canmore. So it's very consistent across the FCSS networks to have a standalone FCSS policy. And with that, we're also to ensure that council has the ability to have more opportunity to select the priorities that we fund. Every 4 years, we do a gap analysis, and we would present that gap analysis to council so that they could use that information to select their priorities for FCSS funding, which then would be put into a City of Grande Prairie FCSS funding framework, which then would go out with the RFP.
Okay. Thank you for the report. You have more? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So this slide here just outlines the organizations within the city that are currently operating city-owned facilities. So these would be the groups that we would put in that larger bucket of funding that would have the 2 years of funding, and primarily it would be operating expenses for all of these organizations. So we just wanted to put them up here so that council was aware of all of the organizations that we have operating city-owned facilities. So currently with community group funding, as mentioned before, it was a 2-year funding cycle, which was approved by council in June of 2023, and that funded 2024 and 2025. And then the 1-year enhancement funding was approved in June of 2024 for this current year. It's recommended for 2026 just to fund all levels of funding for just the 1 year so that we can be aligned with the FCSS funding, and then go back to 2 years of funding in 2027. So then council would see all of the large grants at the same time to fund on the same years.
And currently with the FCSS funding cycle, it's always been a 4-year funding cycle. We're currently in that 4-year funding cycle, and it ends December 31st, 2026. At this time, when we put if it's recommended for us to develop a new policy and funding guidelines, there's lots of opportunities for us to reduce to 4 years to either 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe to even follow some of the recommendations that the community group funding is to look at a seed funding opportunity, because we have been seeing lately over the years that we are having more organizations come forward or more programs come forward looking for that startup, which FCSS could look at. So within the policy change, we would recommend anywhere from a 2 to 4 year funding years.
So this is the current timeline for community group funding for the next funding cycle. So in March is typically when we develop a media release and any marketing materials. We'll start drafting the application form and set up the grant application portal, because everything is online now. So that's new in 2025, which will help get all the applications in properly and all the paperwork without a lot of the back and forth that we've had in previous years. In April, we'll have some application support sessions to answer any questions for community groups that need help help filling out the form. We'll walk them through the new portal, and applications would be due April 30th. After that, we do a financial review with our finance department, and each department that's connected to these community groups also provides an analysis. So that would be the first 2 weeks of May. We submit the report end of May, and then we would have a CCW in June where final approval of the 2026 funding would occur, and that's in alignment with our budget deadlines.
For the FCSS funding timelines, it's a little bit longer. So we would get started in Q1 of 2025, drafting the policy and seeking council approval. By Q3, we would be starting some community engagements just to get some feedback on gaps and analysis that's happening in our community. By Q1 of 2026, we would come back with the findings of the gap analysis to council to seek further input into direction. Then from there, we would develop the framework based on council's direction, proceed with the RFP. The RFP would be live until May. We would then review all of the submissions by June, and then we would come back to council with an in-camera session just to have that discussion to let council aware of the RFP results. And contracts would be completed by September of 26, and new funding would be given out in January of 2027.
And on the last slide here, we just have a summary of the recommendations, which are also outlined in the report. I won't go through them line by line, but they are all there for your consideration, and we are open to questions now.
Wow, thank you. That was a significant report, and a lot going on for both of these funding streams. So first we will go with Councillor Burke. You have a question?
I actually have a handful of them, so I can bump out if needed. So the first one, actually, and it was related to that slide, was the first point, where one of council's strategic priorities is quality of life. And in the same line, it's saying that we are proposing cutting some funding from $15,000 to $10,000 for small organizations. So my question is how many organizations would be negatively impacted, or do we expect to be negatively impacted? But also, on the flip side, how many organizations would be positively affected by receiving $10,000?
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Katie, are you taking this one?
I am. Thank you, Chair Bosch. So currently under the enhancement funding, the one-year funding, the majority of the groups are 10,000 or less. Within that current stream, there are a number of other groups that if they were not identified as a council priority that would be impacted. I wouldn't be able to give you an exact number because it would depend what council wanted to prioritize there. But there's roughly 12 groups not operating city-owned facilities that potentially could be impacted.
Okay, so, but based on last year's budget, or how many would be negatively impacted?
Out of the one-year funding, none.
Okay.
Out of the two-year funding, there potentially could be a few, but again, it would be up to council's
because that's a
discretion.
concern that those organizations that would get cut would be detailing where those cuts are coming from within their organizations, and I'm sure that every one of them has a good argument as to why they need that funding. Mm-hmm. So I'm really cautious about cutting that back, and so that's a concern of mine. And then another follow-up question, if I may.
I'll give you one more, and then we'll move on to others.
Sounds good. How many pots of $25,000 are we looking at?
Thank you, Chair Bosch. So it would depend. I know that's not a very clear answer, but currently the overall budget for community group funding, if you remove the library, is about $2.1 million. If you look at the contractual obligations and those operating city-owned facilities, that's about $670,000. So the remainder is a combination of safety, housing and social services, economy, and some other support groups that fit in there. So
my question actually is more around the medium-sized grants, pilot project seed funding for $25,000. That's an unknown?
Yeah, that would be an unknown at this point because we've never had a seed funding for that amount. Everything has just been apply for whatever amount you need, and then we'll make recommendations based on what we have in the budget. And we don't have an amount approved for 2026 yet.
Okay.
Thank you. Mayor Clayton?
Thanks, Chair Bosch. appreciate the report. It's obvious a lot of work went into this. I think there's a lot here to unpack and for council as well. And so in your report, it's committee direct administration to go through these various steps. What do you see as a timeline in regards to this actually becoming substantiated? And then I have some specific questions. So if you could tell me the timeline you're expecting first, and then I can ask a couple specifics if the chair will allow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bosch. So we would work on amending Policy 315 right away because it would have impact on community group funding for 2026. And then I believe FCSS would be right behind it with their policy as well. So we would need to have these approved in order to make recommendations for June community group funding.
Okay. Mayor
If I
Clayton?
could ask a couple specifics. So following, echoing Councillor Burke's comments in regards to $25,000 projects in the seed money, give me some examples of, I think I can probably picture some examples of SCSS seed projects, seed funding projects, but tell me a community group's example.
Yeah, so this is just completely off the cuff.
It's a large amount for...
Yeah, making some guesses. So one of our groups, say, is Technical Search and Rescue, say they wanted to bring in a specific program for 2 years to get people trained up, or a specific opportunity that they wanted to bring in for a one-time funding. Any of our groups, I would say, would have that opportunity. Say Nighthawk wanted to add a special program for skiing or snowboarding that was a one-time emerging need within the community. That would be an idea.
And so the recommendation in regards to aligning with council priorities. So do you foresee, if these changes were implemented, that at the beginning of a term, once council identifies their strategic priorities, that you would then pick organizations that align and they would be funded for the full 4 years based on the term and the alignment with council's priorities?
Amy?
Yeah, thank you. Just for 2 years. So we would do 2 years and then another 2 years.
Okay. And if I can, stop me when you want. As identified early in your report, community group funding with, if you add up operational dollars in cash, maintenance, gift in kind, sorry, not gift in kind, but funding agreements, and then you look at FCSS, they're both approximately $4 million. So they're both approximately 4%. So collectively, FCSS and community group funding right now is costing us about 8% of our budget. So to me, because that's a significant amount, the gap analysis is of extreme importance to council. And so I'm kind of curious about in the timeline of making these changes. I think council will want to see the gap analysis maybe prior to making some of these decisions. And for me, it's similar to what council approved in regards to a food security coordinator to find efficiencies and operational efficiencies and opportunities. There may be overlap in some of these community groups. There may be efficiencies and missing gaps. And so council, in my opinion, has to have a better understanding of that. And so I'm just wondering when you see the gap analysis and when that opportunity for conversation might be.
Thank you, Chair Bosch. We have outlined in the timelines that we're hoping to bring it back by Q4 of this year. So that's not going to meet the timeline of the changes. Because we have to do community engagement and we have to meet with all of our stakeholders, it would take us a while. We can potentially speed that up, but we wouldn't be even able to start this until about Q2, based on some of the other projects that we currently have to complete by the end of
And I get that. I guess some of my concern is if you want council to approve a funding category for $25,000 seed money projects, I don't even know if that's needed, necessary. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't feel like I have enough information necessary to make some of these decisions today.
Okay. We will go to CEO Burke.
And part of the presentation, the work they've done here is really to set up the next council. We were locked into some funding timelines previously, so we were faced with that option of looking at do we terminate some of those agreements early, or do we look at how we set up the next one? So appreciate that there would be some decisions made this year before the gap analysis was made, but that's why we're recommending a shorter window for community group funding of the year, so that we could sync those up into future years. And really, this is about using the knowledge of this council to set up a process for the next council, and not just starting from scratch when we do have existing agreements in place. So that was the thinking behind this from administration.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Councillor Blackmore, and then we'll go back to Councillor Berg and Mayor Clayton. You're good.
A couple of questions. One's a follow-up for Mayor Clayton's concern. If we move ahead with this and then the gap analysis indicates that we didn't move far enough, or we moved too far, or we can at that time adapt and amend, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. I'm most interested in the FCSS funding, and I know that it's currently at just over $1 million in the budget. I'm wondering if that remains 80% provincial dollars and 20% city, or if we are beefing up that pot of money to meet the needs of our community.
Tammy?
Thank you, Chair Bosch. Currently, it's a 77-23 split for the 1.1 million. So
we are beefing it up
we
by
had
3%.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, say those numbers again, please.
77% and 23%.
23. Okay, that was my question too.
6% actually, when you add the two together.
Okay, Councillor Berg.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Bosch. So one quick question and then a comment, and actually my question is for Chief Waitway. Heading into the 2024 budget, I'd asked for an extra $27,500 for community groups. Was that this pot of money that went to? Do you recall? It's fair enough if you don't.
Thank you for the question through the chair. It would have, if you approved increased community group, that's exactly what Ms. Bieberdorf was discussing, same pot.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just my comment, similar to Mayor Clayton, where on one hand, we're shaving off a potential of $15,000 to groups down to 10. That's a concern for me. On the other hand, to me, the only reason we would do that is for budget considerations. But on the other hand, we've got this $25,000 black hole that we don't know how many 25,000s we're giving out. So there's an argument there that is too vague for me. So I guess as a committee, I'm willing to move this to council for further debate. But I'm just not in favor of cutting back that extra $5,000 at this time, but that's just me.
Thank you. I do have a question in regard, what I have written down here is for the 4.3 million for community group funding is 1.1 or 1.71 of the overall city budget. So are we looking at roughly 4% for both?
Yep.
Right. Okay. That was just a clerical question. And then the gap analysis. I would look forward to seeing something out of that prior to changing everything. I think setting up a new council, they would need as much information as possible. And I say this only because in certain organizations that we're giving money to, I've heard over this past year, some of our councillors are concerned of exactly what does this organization do and why are we giving them so much money. So I think there needs to be an understanding for some of us. Maybe others know everything about each organization, but I don't think that's fully clear. And especially going into a new council year, I think some of those questions will be asked. And then following with that, do you find it's typical, like status quo money going to organizations year after year after year? So I think we have to look at that and potentially through this gap analysis. Do you have thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I can respond to the community group funding piece and the amounts they get year over year. We have seen increases in a lot of the groups that are operating city-owned facilities as their expenses increase. Some of the other ones have remained fairly consistent. We've had small incremental increases a few times, but in general, they're kind of staying the same.
And through FCSS, what would you say?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Very similar response. In the last funding cycle, we did fund 2 new innovative projects. One that's doing amazing and something that we had never, we funded the Reimagine Family Justice for the supports in the community to work with families. And they just received $26.2 million to the Alberta Law Foundation to use Grande Prairie as that pilot. So
Great.
We are seeing innovation happening in our community with some of the programs, but most of the programs have been probably funded for 50 years in our community, and they look to that as their core funding.
That is the concern. So if you want to put seed money into new programming, something's got to give. The pot's only so big. So Mayor Clayton?
Thanks, Chair Bosch. I just wanted to check in on a number you mentioned. 77% is City of Grande Prairie tax dollar revenue that's used for funding, and 23% is provincial funding.
Thank you for the question through the chair. The question and answer was around the 1.1 million the 1 million that we give to the community.
Okay.
That's the difference there. 77% of that 1 million is FCSS contribution, and the difference is the city municipal.
Do you have a total for what the city is contributing right now? Can you tell me that total?
So
And the provincial total as well?
So the total of the provincial contribution plus the revenue is 56%, and the municipality makes up the 44 difference.
Great, thank you. I think for me, that's another part of it. With many sectors of our business, the province is downloading onto municipalities on a regular basis. I don't know when we have an unknown amount of $25,000 seed amounts. I mean, obviously, council can set it to a maximum. I don't want to see us ever contributing more than we're already contributing. You know, it's an extreme amount of money, and a lot of these programs fall under provincial mandates. And so I'm really concerned, the next council needs to keep a really tight eye on this. This number, if it grows, it's substantial. And we already, as a municipality, are providing significant mental health projects and programming. We're providing above and beyond in regards to supports such as mobile outreach. We're going above and beyond in regards to our supports in healthcare, and it's just on and on and on. And so when a province decides to not support community safety initiatives such as photo radar, I just continually worry about this downhill approach that it's being dumped on municipalities. And so this is something that we need to keep on. I appreciate the time that will be required to do the gap analysis, but it's something that requires a lot of attention from the next council. So I'm optimistic that the gap analysis will be very thorough and provide recommendations that may not that may see changes in how we operate FCSS as well as community group funding.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
My only comment is that the organizations that are funded through FCSS, particularly the ones who've been funded for many, many years, do provide very core services to the community of Grande Prairie, and they provide those services at a price that no government would be able to provide. And so I've always been really proud of the nonprofit community in Grande Prairie and how hard those people work to provide really good service to our citizens. And I don't actually expect to see significant differences that will arise through a gap analysis. I am confident that we have been spending that money appropriately for the last 30 to 50 years. And I encourage council, if you don't understand what one of those organizations does, to reach out to them and ask for a tour and ask for a meeting to determine what it is they do. I think you would be amazed at the amount of work they do in very painful, often very painful situations. So I'm not worried about the FCSS funding at all.
Okay, Mayor Clayton.
Just my last comment. Absolutely agree with Councillor Blackmore that the organizations, the output of the work that's done from these nonprofits is exceptional and very required. My concern is the downloading from the province, and the municipalities continue to have to pay more of this as these programs become more, the needs become more acute, which requires more personnel, which requires more expenses. These programs will continue to require more focus and more money, and it can't be on the back of municipalities continually. Thanks.
All right, so we have a motion in front of us. Are we looking for this to go to council or accept for information?
Administration.
Okay, Councillor Blackmore, go ahead.
I would move that this committee direct administration to draft amendments to Policy 315 to remove FCSS funding, to create a new FCSS funding policy that align with the FCS Funding Act, create funding categories for seed funding up to $25,000 per project to a maximum of 2 years, recommend core funding to community assets that align with council priorities and organizations operating city-owned facilities, to amend enhancement funding to a maximum of $10,000 per organization per year, and recommend 1-year funding for the 2026 budget year to align, only to align with the FCS funding timelines. And in speaking to that, when this comes back before council, there's a good chance that we're going to not approve all of it. But I think administration has done enough, a significant amount of work to bring this forward, and it is better to continue down that path and make changes at a later date when we have more information than it is to halt the process right now. So I would ask council to, this committee to support this motion.
Okay, Mayor Clayton.
Appreciate the motion. Happy to support this as it will come back to council for consideration. The one item in there, item number 3, the funding categories for seed money for projects, is one that I would think that council may want to have consideration of a limit. So not asking administration necessarily put a limit there, but council, when it comes back, may want to consider that. Thanks.
So I have a question in regards to this is going to administration. Is it coming back to council? At what point is it coming back? Okay, once they establish policies. Okay. Is there any further comments to this, Councillor Berg?
Yeah, similar to Mayor Clayton, I'm going to ask for a cap as well, but also just have that discussion of leaving the $15,000 cap where it is. And but again, that'll be up to council to decide. But at this point, I'll move it forward to council.
Thank you. I look forward to the continuation of work on this, and we will call the question. And that is carried. Thank you both, Tammy and Katie, for the report. It was extensive and much more work to do. Thank you. We will go directly to the outstanding items list. Chief Lemieux?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple changes to the outstanding items list. Number 1332, Food Security Backbone Organization, and item 1328, Food Security, were dealt with in fourth quarter 2024. So I would ask that we remove those from the outstanding items list.
Thank you, Chief Lemieux. Councillor Berg.
If I may, business, I'd like to move committee receive the January 21st, 2025 outstanding items list as amended for information.
Thank you. That is in order, and we'll call the question. And that is carried. And with that, we will adjourn the Public and Protective Services Committee meeting. Have a good day.